When maintaining your daily wellness rituals is important to you, the change in routine during the summer can feel daunting. Kachava's new travel packs help you stick to your daily ritual, even when you're on the go. Just one packet of Kachava's all-in-one nutrition shake provides complete nutrition with 25 grams of protein, 6 grams of fiber, greens, adaptogens, and much more. So you'll be fueled and ready for wherever life or your summer adventures take you. No fillers, no nonsense. Just the good stuff your body craves. Plus, it actually tastes delicious. But you can try it for yourself because the variety pack includes all 6 delicious fan favorites: chocolate, vanilla, chai, matcha, coconut acai, and strawberry. So instead of worrying about sticking to your daily ritual, simplify it with Kachava. Go to kachava.com and use code PODCAST for 15% off. That's KACHAVA.com, code PODCAST.
MH370 has been called the greatest aviation mystery of all time, but it's not the only aviation mystery. It's not even the only airliner that has disappeared over the open ocean, never to be found. Today I'm talking with Ed Densel, host of the Unfound podcast, about the mysterious case of the Faucett Peru 727 that vanished in 1990 and how it can help us understand MH370. That's all coming up right now. Hi, everybody. Jeff Wise back with you for another episode of Finding MH370, which, of course, is the only podcast devoted to solving the mystery of the missing 777 by diving deep into every corner of the evidence with some of the world's leading technical experts. Today's topic was suggested to me by Ed Densel, longtime friend of the show. He turned me on to the story of a plane that disappeared en route between Iceland and Nova Scotia on September 11th, 1990, with 15 people on board. Apart from a single life raft, no trace of the wreckage was found. We're going to talk about how the case prefigured MH370 in many ways. Before we get to that, I want to make a quick shout out to new paid Substack subscribers Joe Kipput and Nikki Bolte, and to new paid YouTube members Prof. Tilly Fry, Kitty McFluffins, Facing Dexter, and Carl Erickson. And to all the subscribers and members who continue to support the show, I'm so grateful for your help. Just a reminder, paid subscribers and members get access to unique content, both on YouTube and at the Substack show page at findingmh370.com, where even if you don't opt for paid membership, you can still sign up for a free newsletter that goes out with each episode. One last thing, as you'll recall, I posted a survey question along with the last episode. I'm going to discuss the answers after my conversation with Ed, so stick around for that. Right now, we've got a new poll question up for everybody. This is a test of your core MH370 knowledge. Have you been paying attention? I've put a direct link in the pinned comment below on the YouTube page, so you can click right through and vote instantly. Okay, now it's on to Ed and Faucett Peru. Ed Densel, it is so exciting to have you back with me. You are the host of the Unfound podcast, and frequent viewers of my podcast will remember that you and I did it. One of my favorite episodes, we talked about stage magic and what it could tell us or teach us potentially about how MH370 was carried out. I thought that was a really interesting departure from the normal sort of discourse about MH370. Anyway, you had reached out to me with the idea of talking about other disappearances, because we often talk about MH370 as the greatest aviation mystery of all time, but there have been other planes disappearing. And you sent me a list, which was kind of surprisingly long, and some of them I'd heard of and some of them I hadn't.
Yeah.
But you said, let's do a show about all these different ones. And I'm like, yeah, that's a great idea. But then I looked at that and I'm like, this is too much. Like, each one of them is so interesting that I want to really dive into it. So together we chose one that I think is really the most relevant. It's the most similar. It's the most recent in time.
I agree.
And So I would love for you to tell us about it. I'll just hand it over to you. But is there anything I'm missing about it? Anything else you want to say about the Unfound podcast or anything about
No, it's
you?
just great to do a show with you again, Jeff, if I may. I don't know if you know this. We've known each other for like 9 years now. You appeared on Unfound about Flight 370 9 years ago this summer.
Wow.
So, we keep in contact, although we've done a few things together since then, but we keep in contact. And I've enjoyed it. Of course, I follow your, everything that you do on your YouTube channel every week. I get the email notices.
Oh, great.
Of course, I've seen your work on Netflix, and you've become a good friend, and I really respect all your work. So it's good to talk to you today.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Ed. And I should point out that you've also been a good mentor to me, talking to me about podcasting and the ins and outs and the sort of back end part of it has been very useful. Anyway, The audience doesn't care about us and our personal lives, but they are going to be fascinated by this story. Okay, boom. I'm just going to kick it over to you. Tell us about this flight.
I want to echo, it's a very good example, although it's not a perfect analogy to Flight 370's disappearance. It's very relevant because it's a commercial jet. It had many people on it. It went missing, and it's still missing to this day, roughly 36 years later. And it does seem like everybody's forgotten about it.
Yeah.
So this gives us a chance to discuss it and look at what was going on. So coincidentally, it went missing on September 11th of 1990. So creepy. And so I have some notes I'm going to be looking a little over to my right here for everybody. I'm not doing this off the top of my head. This is a Faucett Peru Boeing 727. And for maybe the lay person out there doesn't know much about jets, think about like the size of a Boeing 737, like what Southwest uses. But this jet has 3 engines instead of 2, all on the back of the plane. Or if you want to think of it a little differently, maybe like the UPS jet that crashed some months ago, very tragic, accident that's still being investigated. Think like that jet like 2/3 that size.
Okay.
Quite a bit smaller, like 2/3, but all the engines, one engine in the tail, like on the back.
So the idea that there are engines in the tail is sort of a diagnostic that this is an older plane, because they don't make them like that anymore. Engines used to be less reliable. And so they had to have one in case it didn't work. And so this was an older, so it's almost sort of Boeing's predecessor of the 737, the 727. Right. And it carries about sort of over like 100 plus, between 100 and 200 passengers kind of thing.
Yes, that's exactly right. But they aren't made anymore. They haven't been manufactured for a long time. I think there are still some in operation today, but they are fairly rare. Mm-hmm. But this airline at the time had 8 of them, I found out, 3 engines. Maybe it also might help. This is the engine that this is the kind of jet that D.B. Cooper jumped out of back in the early 70s. And also, I covered a disappearance of a Boeing 727 from Angola, the country of Angola, a jet that was essentially stolen.
We might talk about that on a future episode, actually.
Yes, we could do that. I would love that. So, but this was a jet that had been kind of loaned out, leased out to Air Malta. So it was owned by an airline in Peru that's not around anymore, even though it existed for a long time, since the 1920s. It had been leased out to Air Malta. Malta is a little island off the tip of Italy. And what was going on was, I guess Air Malta was done using this plane.
It was sort of a seasonal rental, I think.
A seasonal rental. And so Faucett Peru sent some people over there, pilots, mechanics, etc., over there to Malta to fly this plane back to Peru, going over Europe, up to Iceland, by Newfoundland, and it was due to land in Miami later in the day, on the day that it disappeared. So it's a very long flight, very common flight up along the North Atlantic. But
it's interesting to note that, you might think, well, if you're flying from Malta to Peru, why not just fly from Malta to Peru? This was an older generation of aircraft. It wasn't as fuel efficient as planes are today, and didn't have the range that planes have today. Today I just was reading the other day that they're introducing service from like Sydney, Australia to London or something like that. I mean, planes can literally fly anywhere, like they can go from anywhere to anywhere else in one go.
18 hours.
Not the case in those days. So historically, I did some glider training with a pilot who was a retired European pilot, and he would fly from the Netherlands to like Jakarta or something, and he would stop like in Egypt and then in like Delhi, and then they would hop around the world like that. Globe hopping was really what it was. There's no more hopping anymore. You just go from A to B.
Right.
So all of which is to say that so they were going to go from Malta to like London, and then Iceland, and then Newfoundland,
yes,
and then finally down to Miami. So this was going to be a grueling trip.
Yes, but we want to make clear this, even though it was a commercial jet, this was not a commercial flight. It was not like a scheduled flight where people could buy tickets and everything. This was just really Faucett Peru mechanics, pilots, and some of their family.
Right.
So we get that 16 people on the jet number.
So it's what they call a repositioning flight. Yeah. And people who watch the Nathan Fielder show, The Rehearsal, okay, spoiler alert. If you haven't already watched it, you should watch it, but don't keep watching this video, because what he does in the very last episode, he starts working as a repositioning pilot. So he's not carrying passengers, but he's flying these planes. So it's a kind of different level of whatever, certification or something. So anyway,
and Jeff, of course, you would know more about this than I would. This is very common for planes to be leased out from one company to another. Very common, not unusual at all.
Yeah, even within one airline, I mean, your planes just might not be where you need them to be. You might have to, like for example, if you've ever been on a flight that got canceled because of mechanical problems, they have to bring in a plane from somewhere else. That's a reposition flight.
Right. Okay. Very good. So it was making this trip and go, like we've just talked about, that route, very common route. If you ever look at like Flight Radar 24, you see all those planes flying up along the North Atlantic. And it disappeared in the air of the Atlantic Ocean, approximately 180 miles southeast of Newfoundland. So we're talking way up there in the North Atlantic. Of course, that's an approximation. We don't know exactly, of course, because the plane is still missing.
But it's like, this is like where the Titanic vanished too, right? More or less.
Up in that area, yes.
Yeah.
So there were 6 crew members on board, as well as 10 passengers. It's the best guess of airline employees and their families. The last contact with the crew was a distress message stating that the aircraft had run out of fuel and that they were preparing to ditch. So they went, got gas in Iceland.
Okay.
And then it's about a 1,600 mile flight to Newfoundland, where they were going to land again. Once again, as you've already stated, not the most efficient commercial jet ever made. Going to land there. And that is the leg where they disappeared.
Okay.
The last transmission and departure destination at around noon, en route from Malta, the aircraft landed at Keflavik International Airport to refuel. The aircraft received weather information and took on about 20 tons, TONNES, 44,000 pounds for us Americans of fuel. It took off at 13:16 local time in Iceland, which I figured out was 9:16 a.m. Eastern time. All right. So Iceland does not change its clocks. So at this time of the year in September, 4 hours ahead of Eastern time. So
it's daylight though, which is the important thing.
Very important. Yes. So 4 hours ahead of like New York City time. The flight to Gander was estimated to take around 3 hours, let's just say 3.5 hours flying in the day. However, the aircraft did not arrive in Gander at the expected arrival time. 30 minutes after it was due in Gander, which would have been 1:50 Eastern time, so taking off 9:16, supposed to get there at 1:50 Eastern time. That's when everybody was like, well, what's going on here? And we should note that's not even, it's about how long it takes to fly across the United States these days. If you're flying from New York to LA, this is that's way farther. That's like 3,000 miles. This is even shorter than that.
But so it's not a really huge distance as far as jets go. It's not a short distance, but it shouldn't be like oh my gosh, we've got this insurmountable length we have to cover. And the weather was good. The winds were very moderate.
Yeah. So, when we talk about the water, the water was not like big waves or anything like that.
So no obvious red flags in terms of weather.
None, zero. 2 nearby flights picked up a transmission from the aircraft that it was declaring a low fuel emergency. The pilots stated that they were at 10,000 feet. Of course, a jet usually flies up in the 30,000, 35,000 feet level.
Right.
And they were preparing to ditch the aircraft in the Atlantic Ocean. The call was made at approximately 2:20 p.m. So this was roughly a half hour after they were already supposed to be in Newfoundland.
Oh, wow.
It seems they didn't figure out something was wrong until late in the flight. They thought, conjecture, hey, we're supposed to be over Newfoundland now. Nobody's calling us. I don't see anything. We don't see any land. And that's when they started to get worried. So a half hour after estimated arrival. So low fuel, how is this possible? Maybe we can talk about this later, Jeff.
Right.
Totally up to you. And the average range, I even checked the average range of a 727 at the time. Around, of course, on the variant and everything, maybe somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500 mile range.
Okay.
So that plane not quite, couldn't carry quite enough fuel to fly across the United States.
Okay. But more than well within its range to get from Iceland to Newfoundland.
Absolutely. More than enough if it was gassed up correctly. The message was relayed by these two other aircraft to air traffic control. And this is maybe where we have to explain. You get out there in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, the radio transmissions sometimes don't reach land. Correct, Jeff?
This is something that we should definitely talk about. Like, why are they relaying messages through other planes and not just talking to ATC directly? That is a very interesting point.
Okay, so we'll come back to that. The aircraft's last known position, this is a little bit of a discrepancy here. We've already stated like 150 miles, 180 miles. What it says here, 250 miles southeast of the city of St. John's, Newfoundland. Of course, that's a different city than where they were supposed to land. This suggested that the aircraft had unknowingly strayed off course, and it is presumed that no one survived the ditching. And so of course, there was a search. They went out there, searched all over the place. Canadian forces, I'm guessing the U.S. Coast Guard helped out, flying all over, a lot of area out there. Of course, nothing was found, although we may talk about was a life raft or something possibly found that you had brought up to me, Jeff.
Yeah.
A weak signal was reportedly detected from the jet's emergency transmitter by a satellite. But then later I read that this plane might not have had one of those ELTs, emergency, once again.
Yeah, there seemed to be. Yeah.
So there's a little bit of a question like that. And then, of course, it would have black boxes on it. Would those not ping for a certain amount of time?
Well, black boxes make acoustic pings that you can detect if you're very nearby in the ocean. This actually happened with MH370 where they didn't know where the wreckage was, but they listened for the pings anyway, which is kind of getting things backwards. They heard what they thought was a ping, as unlikely as it seemed, but there was no wreckage there. So they obviously had gotten a wrong signal.
Right. So this plane, once again, the pilots say, hey, we're ditching. Doesn't land on time. They go out to where they think the plane might have gone into the water. They find nothing except maybe for this life raft that, like I said, we'll talk about in a bit.
Yeah.
Authorities also stated that unusual signals had been picked up by satellites and did not know if these unexplained signals had come from a plane or a life raft. In January of 1991, so just like 5 months later, the NTSB reported that the aircraft was not equipped with the emergency locator transmitter, which would have started working upon impact. Now, that's a big question for me. Why wouldn't the plane not have one of those? You are the aviation expert. I am not, so maybe we can talk about that.
Yeah.
It is assumed that the aircraft ditched in the sea, but nothing's ever been found. Nothing's ever washed up on shore, like with Flight 370 over there in the Madagascar, Africa area.
Right.
And that plane is still missing to this day. This Boeing 27 went somewhere and it's never been found, but we should state, doesn't seem, my perception, doesn't seem like it was searched for as much as Flight 370 was searched for, of course, with all the underwater submersibles. It doesn't seem like they did any of that for this flight. So maybe that's also a discussion that we can have as well.
It is amazing to me when you turned me on to this story, and frankly, I hadn't heard about it at all. I just haven't been focused on other.
Keep your wellness routine going strong all summer. Kachava's new travel packs help you stick to your daily ritual even when you're on the go. Just one packet of Kachava's all-in-one nutrition shake provides complete nutrition wherever you are, with 25 grams of protein, 6 grams of fiber, greens, adaptogens, and more. Simplify your daily ritual. Go to Kachava.com and use code PODCAST for 15% off. That's KACHAVA.com, code PODCAST.
Mysteries.
Yeah.
A lot of things like really stuck out to me about this story, but one of the biggest ones is just how little there is about this. There were no books written about it. There was no movies. I don't know. I have to imagine Mayday covered it since they've like exhaustively covered everything. But a plane vanished and it just didn't make a ripple. And then you contrast it with MH370, which happened 24 years later. And it was the biggest story in the world for like a month or more. Yeah. And I just can't wrap my head around that. Yeah. Partly it's because it was Peru. Let's face it, like 1,000 people can die in an earthquake in some place like Peru. And Americans like just don't, they don't feel like it relates to them. And ditto for probably Europeans and a lot of other pieces. So that's probably part of it. Otherwise, I was, as I'm reading this stuff, I'm like, maybe I should write a book about this because it is truly like a plane vanished. Yes. And there's another piece of it maybe, which is that the way MH370 happened was almost like it was engineered to be a story that would capture the news cycle. If you'll remember, like things like big revelations kept dropping. That the turnback had happened, that it was found on Malaysian military radar, that then the signal, the SDU rebooted and started sending these mysterious satellite signals. So, and then the acoustic ping. I mean, just things kept happening, whereas this thing just sort of, it disappeared and then that was it.
Yeah.
But another thing that really struck me about this story is that it is of a different technological era. Now, I think of 1990. I was born in 1966. You can tell from my gray hairs. I think we've both gotten a little bit grayer since we started talking.
Gen X kids, me and you, 1970. That's when I was born. So yeah.
Okay. Right. So 1990 to me seems like we had computers and things. To me, 1990 feels like modern. But when you look at aviation, there's a couple of things that we have today that we didn't have then. Yeah. Both of which are very significant for this case. The first one is GPS. So today, and this happened sort of starting in the early to mid 90s, but then really gaining steam in the early 2000s. So that by the time of MH370, every plane pretty much has GPS. And so where you are exactly. Where you are to within like meters. And so if you're calling and saying, Mayday, Mayday, I'm having a problem. You would say I am 230 miles on a heading of da-da-da from some whatever point. And they know exactly where you are. And so when they search for Air France 447, they had these data. They had satellite data that was stamped with the exact GPS location, so they knew exactly where to look,
Right.
which is a big head start. What did they have instead back on this geriatric plane that was geriatric even back in 1990?
Yeah.
In those days, you basically had two ways of finding a way around. One was magnetic compass. So you're basically just following a heading based on like what the magnetic lines are.
Yeah.
And then the other is a thing called INS, Inertial Navigation System. It's basically, you're familiar with like a gyroscope. It's basically that. You sort of can align yourself with a known place on Earth. You're flying along and you're using a combination of, and then the other thing that they use is these radio beacons. And they're called VORs, Vortac, similar things, but basically you're homing in on a radio beacon. And getting from point A to point B, once you're out of sight of land, means knowing where you are and then extrapolating from that based on either the radio beacon you're following or the magnetic lines you're following or the gyroscope that's guiding you. And that will tell you where you're going. If you lose track of where you are, it can be pretty hard to figure out where you are, especially if you're not within range of a VOR or some kind of radio beacon. So when these guys took off from Iceland, they knew exactly where they were. But if they made a mistake, they could quickly find themselves not only not knowing where they are, but with no easy way to figure out where they were.
Right.
And that's pretty much what happened. Another very famous case of something like this happening was KL 007.
Yep.
And this was a flight.
And you read in my mind exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
so this is
yes. Yeah.
There was a flight. It was flying from Anchorage, Alaska to Seoul, Korea, and they made a mistake. And they were supposed to be using one form of navigation, and they were using another. And without realizing it, they had drifted, and they actually drifted into Soviet territory and got shot down by the Soviets.
Yes.
Something like this happened, but because we don't have the black boxes, we don't have the plane, there were no survivors, we don't know what the mistake was.
Right.
However, it's so easy. Like, people talk about Amelia Earhart like as like a great mystery as well, but in a way it's not really a mystery because she was famously not that good of a navigator, not that good of a pilot, and she was flying a very unreliable aircraft with very unreliable navigation systems. So it's kind of not at all surprising that she went missing. And similarly, in this case, with MH370, you're like, well, how could this have happened? There's all this technology. That's one of the great mysteries of MH370 is that we should know where it is. Mm-hmm. That doesn't apply with this case. The 727, it's completely obvious. It's not obvious why we don't know where it is, but it's very, very easy to imagine this plane, the navigator screwing up their job. Somebody makes it's very easy to imagine.
Right. And I remember with Flight 007, the way I remember it, and I've seen that Mayday episode, and of course we now know that the Soviet Union knew that it wasn't a spy plane, that it was a 747, all the paperwork, and they shot it down anyway. But anyway, the way I remember it, it was just a simple switch on the dash of the 747 that it was supposed to be following like a longitude and latitude, but it was flipped over to something else. And that's all it took. And they got off by several miles, and they didn't even know it. They were flying over the Soviet Union, didn't even know it.
Something that pilots like to do is if you're relying on some means of navigation, you want to have a backup. So ideally, if you're flying by the compass, you will also have the VOR. There's a thing called pilotage, which pilots do, which is just looking out the window. So if you're flying and you don't expect to be over Kamchatka, but you see volcanoes and grizzly bears under you, that might be a warning sign. And anyway, we're not here to talk about that flight, but the point remains that if you're out over the open ocean of the North Atlantic and all you're seeing is water, there's no pilotage to be done. You're out of range of a radio beacon, and there's nothing that's obviously telling you you're in trouble. Now, these guys obviously, probably what happened, or here's some just unfounded speculation for you. They were supposed to get to Newfoundland, and they didn't. And they're like, damn, they have a sinking feeling in their stomach, like, we should be over this place right now, and we're not. And not only are we not over it, but I can't even see it.
Right.
The inertial navigation system that they were probably relying on was supposed to have an accuracy of 2 nautical miles per hour. So it was kind of drifting. But 2 nautical miles, or even 6 nautical miles if it's been 3 hours, like that's nothing in terms of, if you're at 35,000 feet, you can see 100 miles easy. Yeah. And so if you're not seeing anything, you're nervous. And they obviously were pretty far out to sea, because they couldn't, if you were even on the very, very edge of the horizon, you saw land, well, you would fly right to the land. Right. They were pretty far out. So presumably they made a pretty massive navigational error. Now, there's another part of it, which is satellite communications. Another thing that was starting to become available in the early 90s, but only in the next decade started to become more and more common, and then was really very, very prevalent by the time MH370 happened in 2014. This was not available to them. So what they have instead is a kind of radio called VHF, very high frequency radio. And it is a way that you can communicate to people who are in line of sight of you. Now, the Earth is curved, so if you go any kind of distance, people are going to be kind of hidden behind the curve of the Earth. But other airliners that are flying, they're higher up above that curve of the Earth, and they're also maybe near you, so you can relay messages. So that's why we had that phenomenon of like relaying the messages. Yes. Now, I sent you a story that the UPI ran in the week following the disappearance. I read it. Yeah. And they said that a satellite had picked up a signal from the plane, and then another aircraft had picked it up on its radar. And so by sort of triangulation, they were able to sort of form a rough idea of where this thing was. I don't know if that's how they came up with this idea that it was 150 or an 80-mile distance off the coast. I'm not exactly sure. Yeah. Ed, there is so much about this case that is hazy and sketchy just because it has not been written about. Again, I can't believe there isn't a whole book written about this mystery.
I agree with you. I wanted, and I will also say I've read a little bit, just some other places, that when it comes to magnetic headings and everything, the higher you get up, north, on the Earth, does not that discrepancy become bigger? Is that true? If you're going to use magnetic north for your navigation, does it not throw it off even more the more north you get, toward the North Pole? And the idea was that, could it be because these pilots who were Peru pilots were only used to kind of flying right around there along the equator? They really didn't understand how much the magnetic pole discrepancy would cause, their navigating to be off that much. Is that possible, or what?
I think it's entirely possible. I don't know. We don't know. I mean, we just don't know. I mean, and I want to say something about speculating about causes of aircraft. There was just a crash that I'm writing about, a really interesting crash. I'll be talking about it in the future. Okay. But we didn't know. The preliminary report hadn't been issued. And I was trying to figure out the details of this strange and I think very important case. Okay. And I was sort of trying to piece together what I thought was most likely to have happened. I was completely wrong. Wow. And so it's a useful exercise to sort of say, could it be this? Could it be this? Could it be this? That's a good way to sort of wrap your head around what the possibilities are, what are the factors in play, and then keep an open mind, because people, when you see how humans actually behave in the real world, they do all kinds of very idiosyncratic things. Yeah. And so, we were talking about Air France 447 a little bit earlier. Oh, there was a lot of speculation by me and others, just like, what could have happened? Could it have been this? Could it have been that? And nobody got it right. Everybody was completely wrong. There are some people who say it's actually wrong to speculate before something is laid down. I don't agree with that. I think that part of the scientific method is sort of laying out all the different hypotheses that could be valid. The dangerous thing that we have to very strenuously avoid is coming up with a theory and then falling in love with it and grabbing onto it. And so we do have to keep an open mind. So could the magnetic variation have played a role here? Yeah, I think it could have, but we don't know. But somehow they took off and they got turned in the wrong direction. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. You think about how many tens of thousands of flights there are every single day, and the fallibility of humans. It's always amazing to me that there aren't more just like knuckleheaded crashes.
You're right. We should reiterate. Flying is a safe way to travel. Nothing that Jeff ever says on his channel or my channel or what you see on Mayday, it is safe.
Yeah.
It's as safe as it's going to get, unless you just want to stay home and never go anywhere anymore.
But by doing what we're doing, and professionals doing what they do, figuring out mysteries is what makes it safe. So
if I could ask you about the radio transmission,
sure.
They couldn't reach air traffic control. I mean, how far, once again, your experience, you are the pilot.
Right.
How far, I mean, what is reasonable to expect if they're trying to reach Gander? Hey, we're lost. And the airport in Gander never hears from them. I mean, how far do you have to be away for that to happen?
I can't give you a number because I just don't know. But it's like, imagine you're up at 35,000 feet. You have to have line of sight to the ground. And, of course, antennas are often, raised on a tower for precisely that reason. So these pilots found themselves not where they thought they were going to be, not really having a good plan, and they really didn't. I mean, what could they have done? We don't know. We don't know what they did. And one thing I found really interesting in some of the material that you sent, as you and I were both researching this, apparently, according to one source, the 727 was designed to be able to ditch. That blew my mind. I had no idea. That famous with the A320 that Sully ditched in the Hudson, it did pretty well. It held together and nobody died. So I don't know, maybe aeronautical engineers think about ditchability when they design planes. I don't know.
Well, you think with the 727 being that the engines aren't under the wings, that you lay down, you put the plane down tail first and kind of try to ease it in there. Those engines under the wings can certainly cause a lot of, drag, hits the water. Whereas the engines on a 727 up on the fuselage, you'd think it would be easier to kind of smoothly lay that
That's
down.
A really interesting point. I was thinking about how one of the reasons that Boeing has had trouble with the 737 is that the airframe was originally designed to operate at airports that didn't have jetways. That's right. And it was designed for an earlier era of aviation around the same, this is in the 60s, around the time that the 727 was in its heyday. Things were simpler. Planes were airports were much less advanced than they are today. And you might have to walk downstairs. In fact, you look at old movies and it's like kind of I forget, there was a movie where somebody has a car that is like, has a stairs. They're driving around. Do you know what I'm talking about? Does that ring a bell?
No.
There's a movie, people can say in the comments what this is, but there's a movie that's a funny movie and it's kind of humiliating, but their car is airport stairs.
I do.
And airport stairs used to be like a really common thing. I'm really getting off track here. Maybe in a day when aircraft engineers were designing planes at a time when aircraft engines were a lot less reliable, aircraft navigation was a lot less reliable, the prospect of having to ditch was a much more front of mind idea than it is today. Maybe they actually designed aircraft so that they could land in a field or in a lake or something. So I don't know.
That does bring us though to the point that they went and searched it, didn't find anything. So I guess whatever happened with this ditching, it didn't go very smoothly, I guess.
I don't know. I don't know if I'd agree with you, Ed, because they did find this raft mysteriously. The raft. Now, and there was reports from a Soviet trawler This shows again how back in another era we were. There were still Soviet trawlers, although the Soviet Union was just about to collapse the following year.
It was, yes.
But the Soviet trawler reported that they found a fuselage, or they saw something that looked maybe like a fuselage, and the colors that this isn't ringing a bell with you at all.
No, I'm just shaking my head.
Okay.
No, please continue. I'm shaking my head because it's just amazing. Yeah. Wow,
how much credence do we give to the Soviet trawler? Don't really know. But it does seem very credible that this raft turned up. Now, to me, it implied that the plane ditched successfully enough that it wasn't just a million pieces, that the aircraft fuselage was intact enough. Now, I think that these, and again, viewers can, if any viewer has better information, they can let us know. The raft will auto-deploy, or will a flight attendant have to pull a lever and make it deploy? I don't know. But to me, it implies a certain amount of ditching versus crashing.
Yeah.
Meaning it must have been a somewhat controlled event that this thing was in one piece. What happened to the rest of the thing? Now, people have speculated that MH370 was deliberately ditched. I don't hold to this at all myself, but have speculated that MH370 was deliberately ditched because the pilot didn't want there to be any clues. So he glided it down and ditched very successfully, and then the plane just sank in one piece. Well, we know it didn't sink in one piece because pieces have washed up, but that was the idea. Could that have happened for real in this case? A sort of Sully-style ditching that results in the plane intact, sinking in one piece to the bottom, except for this raft that auto-deployed. Again, it's just speculation. We don't know. We don't know what the truth would turn out to be. Somewhere in Titanic land, on the seabed there, maybe someone will get lost going to the Titanic and they'll stumble on this thing instead. Yeah. It's up there somewhere, and people obviously don't care as much as they do about MH370, which must be pretty sad for the families and the loved ones.
Can you let's talk about that? Is this just a little different era? You know, we got 1990 pre-internet, pre-cell phones, pre-social media and everything. Right. And then of course, even in 2014, I mean, what we have now dwarfs what even we had, 12 years ago. Is this something just because of media, or how do you see that? They didn't send even one ship out there with a submersible. Of course, the technology existed in 1990.
Right.
Found just 5 years before that, up in the same area. How do you look at that? Once again, you are the aviation expert. Can you explain?
Well, this is, I think, going beyond aviation. If I'm catching your drift, it's like it's not so much what happened aeronautically, but what happened culturally.
Yeah,
that there wasn't CNN giving wall-to-wall coverage. There wasn't Reddit. There wasn't Facebook. There wasn't all of the ways that stories go viral today. So if the old white guy who was running the newsroom at the New York Times or the New York Post or CBS just didn't find it that interesting. You know what I mean? I think MH370 really was a cultural phenomenon to a large extent. I mean, somebody at CNN told me that people criticized CNN for running as much coverage of MH370 as they did. But people, internally, people said the minute we stop talking about MH370, people turn off their TV sets. Like all they really want to hear. We can see from people's behavior that this is what they want to hear about.
Yeah. And maybe we saw that more recently with, of course, the mid-air collision in Washington, D.C. I mean, that was 24/7 for how many days regarding that. If it happens back, of course, we had a D.C. crash back in 1981 with that, the 737 that went into the river there with the ice, and it was a story. Yeah. But it was there and then it was gone. But then, 40 years later, we have a mid-air collision. It's everything everywhere. Maybe that's what we're talking about for this flight, that 1990, it got some attention. And then people just moved on. And in fact, there's articles that I sent you from newspapers.com. I even did searches for 1991, 92, nothing. After 1990, not written about at all. And media.
And the fact that I'm a guy who spent 12 years worrying about a missing airplane.
Yeah.
And then you sent me this thing that I hadn't heard of because I hadn't researched into it. So it is a fascinating both as an aeronautical accident, but as a piece of culture. Like, why did it vanish as a story and as an aircraft? And again, I do think that MH370 is different in a way that ties back to our last conversation on this channel, talking about capturing people's imagination, creating a sense of mystery. There are things about MH370 where your attention is almost funneled into it. It seems like we know something. We are led to a conclusion that turns out not to be true. And so we have a sense of forward motion and then that mystification. And something I talked about in members only content short form that I put up a little while ago, talking about the idea of mystery, how people think about the world around them. I was out on the Hudson River, which I like to paddle on. It's a very muddy, expansive river, and you don't know what's in it. And your imagination can kind of run wild, and you can kind of embrace the sort of, it's wonderful to be out in nature and sort of embrace the not knowing what's around you, and this sort of, you sense you're kind of something that's bigger than you and you don't fully understand it. That's a completely valid and legitimate way to experience the outdoors. A scientist would say this is a river of such and such cubic meters per second volume. It is a such and such a depth. The creatures living in are this, that, and the other thing. We can actually sequence the DNA of every organism living in this river and have a complete survey of every organism. We don't have to have any mysteries if we don't want it. And one of the things I've been thinking about MH370 is that people want mystery. I think there's a significant number of people who follow MH370 that prefer for it not to be solved.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I've said that many times just about the quote unquote regular disappearances that I feature on my podcast. Absolutely. There are people who want mysteries just so they have something to talk about, and they hope it doesn't get solved so they can continue to have those conversations. Absolutely true.
That's really interesting. It's interesting as a kind of socio-psychological phenomenon, but it's also relevant because I'll be frank with you, that's not where my head is at. I want to solve this mystery. I have very concrete, mundane, non-mystical motives, which is to make flying safer by finding out what happened to this plane and taking steps that I think are urgently needed to change the system.
Right. There's a lot of reasons. There are technological reasons. There are safety reasons. There are criminal reasons. If a crime really was committed by whoever, however you say that, those people need to be brought to justice. I mean, a lot of different concrete, very good reasons to do it that have nothing to do with sensationalism.
I love that you brought that up, because one of the things I want to think about and maybe talk about on the podcast is the path to a criminal prosecution. I think, talk about closure. I think an accident report that reaches a conclusion as the causes of a crash, that's one kind of closure. Another kind is prosecution. In the case of MH370's sister aircraft, MH17, people were convicted for their role in the killing of these people. I would like to see people convicted for their role in the killing of the people on board MH370. If it is possible, if that's what happened to the plane. I don't think we can rule that out at this point. And so that idea kind of opens up a whole new realm of expertise that I need to tap into. And so, which, as you know, I like tapping into new areas of expertise. I like to try to bring in, like you, Ed. I appreciate your sharing your expertise on the world of things missing and people missing. So that's where we are.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we have, this flight from 1990, 16 people missing, commercial jet, probably ditched. Doesn't sound like there was anything criminal, but certainly people deserve to know what happened, and certainly needs more attention that it's been given over the past 36 years.
That's really something to think about. What do we do about this flight? How do we give it some more attention? Because I do think that those family members, though they're fewer in number, they also deserve closure. They also deserve answers. Ed, I want to thank you once again for helping me out, for coming on the show. And we have more things to talk about. So this will not be the final voyage of the Jeff and Ed show. Always great to have Ed on the show. Okay, to wrap things up, let's talk about the quiz that I put up along with the last episode of the show. The question was, why did MH370 send transmissions to the Inmarsat satellite after it flew up the Strait of Malacca? This was the first question I wanted to ask because, to me, it is the single most important clue as to the fate of the airliner. All of the Inmarsat data comes as a result of this event. The seabed search was a result of the Inmarsat data. So if you don't know the answer to this question, it's going to be really hard to make sense of the mystery. Well, I'm happy to report that most of you got it right. 64% said someone turned off the SATCOM after Agari and turned it back on. That's true, and the fact that the box has no on-off switch means that to do that, whoever took the plane must have had some pretty advanced technical knowledge, more so even than a normal airline captain. So thanks to everyone who took part. If you'd like to try your luck again, be sure to check out the new quiz question on the community page. Again, I've put a link in the pinned first comment. In the next episode, I'll be discussing new evidence about the case, so be sure to keep an eye out. Until then, this is Jeff Wise saying, see you next time.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.